Welcome to How to Share, a podcast about sharing to the appropriate audience in the best way, at the right time, and how to receive when others share. In this episode, we are with the insightful and thoughtful Michelle Oram, talking about how to share life's challenges. The conversations with friends and family, when you have to share bad news, like the death of a parent or a cancer diagnosis, can be difficult to navigate. Michelle walks us through how she decided who, when, and how to tell of her breast cancer diagnosis in 2011. We talk about the details that are sometimes easier to discuss with others going through the same thing, especially when we want to maintain some normalcy for our loved ones. Michelle talks about the very real fatigue that comes with having to share news over and over again in one-on-one conversations, and how alternatives like email can help. We talk about the things that are most helpful and unhelpful to hear and receive when we are facing life's challenges. I know you'll appreciate Michelle's grounded wisdom that helps us to have a more thoughtful response to others when they share life's challenges. Michelle has such great experience and wisdom, and we get to hear how she's helping others with her retirement coaching business. Retirement presents both opportunities and tests that Michelle offers some great services to navigate. This is a great episode that will help you prepare to share life's challenges. Join us as we dig in to thoughtfully delineate the who, when, and how. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Wynne. How are you doing?
I'm well, and I'm so happy to talk to you because we've talked many times on different podcasts, and you already have such good insight, and it's actionable, and that's what I love about sharing with you is that.
Well,
So
thank you. I'm happy to be here.
good. So you've written about, we're calling this episode "How to Share Life's Challenges." You've written beautifully about ways to support people with cancer and the 12 things never to say with somebody that has cancer. But as you write about this in 2011, when you were diagnosed with breast cancer, you weren't sure what you needed at the time. Can you tell us how and when you learned what to share?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think, and I think most people that have gone through a cancer diagnosis can relate to this, right? When you first hear the words, your mind just goes into this like tailspin of, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And you immediately think the worst and you don't even know what to think. I mean, honestly. And I remember, it was a Tuesday afternoon and my husband and I came home from the doctor's office and I sat on the couch and my surgery was actually booked for the following week. So I didn't have a lot of time to really think too much, which was probably in some ways a good and a bad thing, right? So, I immediately in my head started thinking about, okay, well, here I am, I'm having surgery. Who do I need to tell, right? And how do I need to tell them? So I kind of did this sort of prioritization exercise, which is funny because that's what you do with any type of communication. When Brian Hannon was on your podcast a couple weeks ago, he talked about that, right? Knowing your audience and thinking about your audience. So that's kind of what I did, right? It was like, okay, well, I had to tell my daughters and they were little. They were 8 and 11 at the time. So that was a challenge, but I had to tell them. I had to tell my mom because I was going to need my mom to come and stay with the girls while I was having surgery. And so, I kind of made this sort of priority list of these are the most important people. I had to tell my boss, even though she kind of knew what was going on. She didn't know for sure what was happening. So I had to tell my boss. So I made my priority one list, right? So these are the most important people, the people who had a stake in this, right? Who were most directly impacted by what was happening.
And I love that you
then,
brought that back to Brian's episode because
yeah,
you don't want those people to learn it from somebody else.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, so that was really how I approached it, right? It was
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, well, those were my first group of people. So I had them, there were my sisters were on that list, right?
Mm-hmm.
Close, really people that I'm very, very close to.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was like, okay, so we'll get them, we'll take care of them first. And then who's the next group of people? Well, these are people that are impacted and will care, but they're less impacted, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people like my coworkers, my extended family, sort of your extended community of people from church or people from different
Right.
activities or whatever you do. And then everybody else was sort of priority three to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of one of the things that I always did, and always the approach I took was I was pretty open and honest. I know when it comes to sharing health information, some people are very closed off and they
Right.
don't want to share. That wouldn't be me. Like that's not my
Mm-hmm.
style at all. I do tend to be pretty open. So I really I would talk. I not that I was oversharing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I certainly kept a lot of the details of what I was going through quiet. But if someone would talk to me and ask me questions, I would be more than willing to answer their questions and talk to them about how things were going. So that's
That,
kind of my
yeah, that
priority.
goes to that what's secret versus what's private
Yes,
part.
exactly.
And as you
Yeah.
said, everybody does that differently. For you, it was okay to be open about that,
Yeah. Because
right?
I think what you get when you open yourself up is
Mm-hmm.
you open yourself up to support, right? And I think that
Mm-hmm.
if I had
That's
kept everything private and not told people, I would have missed out on so many of the things that I look back now and I've
mm-hmm.
realized were the positives from the experience, were just the number of people who stepped up and said, how can I help? What can I do?
Right.
People from church, like it was just unbelievable the number of people who offered their support. So I would have missed out on that had I chosen to keep it
Keep it
private and not
private,
tell
right?
anybody.
I mean, and that's the great thing about sharing is that in that it's that exchange of information and feeling
Yeah,
and support, as you say.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
I had a friend recently make an insightful comment that sometimes it's easier to share things with strangers than the people that are impacted. You know, like you're telling a massage therapist or a healthcare professional something that's going on that you don't want to necessarily. It's a little bit harder when somebody else has a stake in the game, as you said. I know you had an online breast cancer support group. How did
Mhm.
you balance sharing information with them as you went through treatment and the journey versus sharing with your family?
The interesting thing about that group of ladies was that although we started out as strangers, we
Mm-hmm.
were all at the same point in our journey. So we all came
Mm,
together as a group soon after our diagnosis, and we were all starting chemo at the same time. It was while we started out as strangers, that very quickly became the place where I could talk about absolutely anything to
mm-hmm.
people that actually understood and could
Right.
relate, right? So if I was having a particular side effect after a chemo
Mm-hmm.
treatment or whatever it happened to be, no matter how
Mm-hmm.
personal it was,
Right.
I could go to that group and say, hey, has anybody else been through this? And what did you
Right.
do? Because this really sucks. So they became sort of my go-to for questions, for advice. And it's interesting that all these years later I'm still in touch with a lot of those people. They're all over the world. It was
Mm-hmm.
kind of an interesting group of people, but it was much easier to share with them and to talk to them just because they knew exactly
Mm-hmm.
what was
Mm-hmm.
going on. It's harder with people that don't know because there's that fine line between you don't want to burden them with too
Mm-hmm.
much detail. Like, for example, my daughters, and they were young, they were
Right.
11 and 8 at the time I was diagnosed. There was a lot I didn't tell them, and there was a
Mm-hmm.
lot I didn't share with them, right? And one of my goals was just keep things as normal as possible for them. So I still got up in the morning, I got dressed, I drove them to school. I tried to keep their lives as normal as possible. So, in a lot of ways, even now, they would say they really didn't, other than the fact that I was going for hospital appointments, their lives didn't change. And that was my goal. So, there are certain groups of people that you want to protect from too much
Mm-hmm.
information. So you
Mm-hmm.
don't overshare with them. But it is important to have that outlet and to
Right.
have those people that you can share with and that you
Right.
can unburden yourself.
Because as you said, I mean, so pretending like that everything is normal is great, but then you don't get the support, right?
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
and as you said, it's about the audience. You know
Yeah.
that you don't want to do that to your young daughters.
Yeah.
Um, Right. And I think about other things that I've had to tell people, like when my dad died suddenly in a
Hmm.
bike accident. That was the same type of sharing, a
Hmm.
life challenge. And what's interesting is, the responses are very varied.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
it's
Oh, yeah.
it's hard to think about then as you're going through it, how to manage somebody else's emotion, reaction, and experience.
Yeah, and I do think that that's one of the key differences between sharing personal health information, or in your case, the death of your father,
Mhm,
and sharing in the corporate sense. Because one of the things I've always sort of said about when it's your personal information,
mhm,
it's your story, and you are the most important thing in
mhm,
that conversation, right? It's not about them. And unfortunately, some people do tend to make it about them.
mhm,
And that's always a challenge. But it's not about them. You need to be sensitive to the fact that it's hard for them to hear it. But at
mhm,
the same time, you have to look after your own self
mhm,
interest,
mhm.
because ultimately you're the one. I remember somebody saying, you're the one rowing that rowboat, and you're
Mhm.
the one in there by yourself having to deal with this, right? And yes,
Right.
the support is important, but I think that's the key difference, because
Mhm.
from a corporate standpoint or workplace standpoint, if you're sharing bad news, you kind of have to put your emotions on the back burner,
Mhm.
and you need to share in such a way to let the recipient open up, because it really then does become more about them. So I think, like, when I think
Mhm.
about sharing the bad
Interesting.
news,
Mhm.
that's the key difference, is when it's a personal or health challenge, it's more about you.
Mhm.
When it's a workplace setting, it's really not about you. And
Hmm.
even though it might be difficult for you, you kind of have to put that aside.
And I wonder if that affects the timing then, because then you don't want to say it when you're still in that process of understanding what you need
Yes.
yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It is difficult because, because I was having surgery so quickly, I kind
Mhm.
of had to get the word out to people.
Mhm.
And, I remember talking to my boss, right?
Mhm.
And it was kind of interesting. So the way she chose to share it with my team was, she got them all together, and they had a meeting, and this was back in the in-person days when everybody was in the office,
Thank
right? So they
goodness,
all got
right?
together in a room, and she
Hmm.
told them. And the funny thing was, she told them, because I was going into the office the day before, 2 days before my surgery, I wanted to go in and clean up loose ends. Like, I didn't want to leave a mess for people, so I was going into the office. So she actually told them, well, Michelle's coming in on Monday, but don't talk to her. Please don't. The last thing she needs is everybody coming up to her and going, how are you doing? Everything.
Right.
So the funny thing was, I went into the office on the Monday. I was at my desk, and one by one, everybody was sending me emails going, hi, Michelle. I know you probably don't want to talk about it, but I want you to know I'm thinking about you. It was just so funny. I was like, I really appreciated that, because
Yeah.
it was so difficult
Mhm.
to tell the story in the
Mhm.
beginning over and over and over again. And
Right.
that's why, and some people might not have liked this, but after I told the priority one people, the close circle of people, for a certain group of people in the priority two group, I sent them an email and I
Yeah.
said, I'm really sorry. And if this comes across as something that you don't think is appropriate in an email, but I just can't keep telling the story
Right.
one by one over and over and over again, because it was so
Yeah.
draining every time, right?
Right.
And I don't think anybody was offended by that. Like, I think
Mhm.
everybody understood that, they appreciated me telling them what
Yeah.
was going on, but they also recognized that it was difficult and that I couldn't just keep going over and over. It's like
Right.
the movie Groundhog Day, right? Where you live
Yes.
the same
Right.
day. And
Right.
that was what it felt like. And every time I told the story, it felt like the same thing over and over again,
Yeah.
right?
And that's such an interesting talk, how to share lesson, which is that
Hmm.
it's okay to use different methods to do it.
Exactly.
Once you've broken up your audience, which you,
Hmm.
delineated so beautifully for us, and the
Yeah.
timing of it,
Yeah.
then, in some ways that email helps to make sure that everybody hears it in that group at the same
Yeah.
time,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Make
and I think that it also helps them process it too, right? Because when you hear something verbally, and
Mhm,
I know, Vicky and you had talked
mhm,
about this, right? Like, you're not always necessarily listening, and the emotions get in the way of the
mhm,
listening
mhm,
sometimes, right? So
right?
then as soon as you hear the bad news, your brain starts going and you're not
Mm-hmm.
really processing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, in an email, yes, you get the bad news, but you actually have time to sort of read the email, absorb
Mm-hmm.
it, think about it, right? And then come and ask me questions. And I did say that in the email, right? Like,
Yeah.
if any of you have questions you want to talk about, I'm happy to talk about it. I just can't tell the story over and over
Right.
and over again,
Right.
right?
Right. Right. And
Yeah.
then it helps people have a better and more measured response, right?
Yes.
So in the responses was how can I help a good one to hear?
Oh, absolutely. Like
Yeah.
that is probably the single biggest thing that you
Mm-hmm.
can do. So rather than, platitudes and saying things like you're going to be fine, which you
Mm-hmm.
don't know that they're going to
Mm-hmm.
be fine at that
Right.
point. How can I help is probably the best thing to say
Mm-hmm.
because they need help. They might not recognize they need
Mm-hmm.
help. And I think for me, that was the hardest thing as I've always been very, very independent. And for me to be the one needing help was
Right.
huge, right?
Right.
And I will admit, when people would say, well, how can I help? In the beginning, I was like, I don't know. I don't really know
Right.
what I need, right?
Right.
But just the fact that they had opened the door, that they could help, and
Mm-hmm.
me knowing that, okay, if I need something, then that
Mm-hmm.
person can be there for me
Right.
is huge.
Yeah. It's interesting to because I think about your article that you wrote about how to best support people with cancer. I
Mhm.
think that is super helpful to people who are going through it, who
Yeah,
don't know what they need yet,
yeah,
because, as we deal with life's challenges and figure out our own lessons from them, when we cultivate them and memorialize them as you have in writing, it helps other people who are doing that same journey.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons I shared on my blog. I wrote
Hmm.
about it, even though it was after the fact. It was many years after the fact that I started my blog. I just wanted to help people to help people understand too the what not to say
Hmm.
because I don't think most people come at it from any sort of a with bad intentions, right? I think they just don't know and they say
Right.
things without necessarily thinking about the impact of what they're saying on the person that's hearing it and what they're
Right.
going through, right? So that
Yeah.
was my first thing I wrote was, don't say these things. Like
Yeah.
these are never, never, ever good things to say to somebody
Yeah.
with cancer. But then on the other side of that, I wanted to also share, here are some things that you can do to help people.
Right. Well, and it's just good food for thought to prepare somebody. I mean, you and I were talking before we hit record. I had a friend who was dying of brain cancer. And, when I would see him, my impulse would be to say, "How are you?" Which was a terrible question. Having somebody give you the idea to say, "It's good to see you," or
Yeah.
"How are you today?" Just to have that seed planted is a
Yes.
great thing. So
Yeah,
going
definitely.
going through this life challenge, how's it impacted how you address somebody else when they're have a life challenge?
Um, I mean, I think I've learned just to offer support and I've learned to listen more, and that's why your episode that you did with Vicky was so great because it was
Hmm.
all about listening, right? Is listen more, talk less, let them tell you what they need, but make sure that one of the worst things you can do is just disappear. And I had that happen, right?
Hmm.
I had people that I would have thought I could count on that just kind of disappeared. And I think a lot of that is just they just didn't know what to
Hmm.
do. And sometimes the support came from the strangest of places that I would not
Hmm.
have expected. But I think that, it really is just be there and let them know that you're there and still continue to include them in things,
Hmm.
right? And one of the best things I liked was when someone would come to me and go, "Hey, I don't know if you're feeling up to it, but, a bunch of us are going to do this. And we wanted to make sure you knew you were included." And sometimes, some days it was, no, I don't think so. And other days it was, yeah, absolutely,
Right.
I'm all in. Right.
Right.
But I think that it's just letting them know that, they're there and
Hmm.
they're still part of the crowd. Right.
Hmm.
And that
Hmm.
you
Right.
support them in whatever way you can. And
Right.
that's what I try to do now in that
Hmm.
situation.
I think, that's one of the benefits to through going through life challenges
Mhm.
in whatever that way that you are is that you realize how both individual they are, but also how universal they are in that we all face them. We all need support through them. We all can empathize a little bit more, listen a little bit more. when other
definitely.
people share. Yeah. I love all these lessons that you've shared with us because they help us both think about, prioritizing, timing, what kind of reaction that you're going to get,
Mhm.
receiving help when you get it. I know that you are starting a new business. Do you have a Second Life retirement coaching, right? Tell us about how that journey is going.
It's going okay. I mean, I one of the things that, when I chose to, I say retire, sort
Hmm.
of retire
Hmm.
from my full-time job,
Yeah.
I knew I was going to want to do something.
Hmm.
I'm not a sit around and do nothing kind of person.
No, you
So it's
definitely are
going.
not.
No, I know my husband would definitely agree with
Hmm.
that statement.
Hmm.
But anyway, uh, I so I wanted to start my own business. So I certified as a retirement coach
Hmm.
to help people with the non-financial side of retirement because we often think about the money side. Do I have enough money to retire? But a lot of people don't give enough thought to the emotional side and to what the heck are you going to do with all of
Hmm.
that time you're going to have on your hands? And where is your sense of meaning and purpose and social
Hmm.
connection that you get from your job going to come from when you don't have that job anymore? So it's going fine. It's going slow. I have my website up and running. I have had, a few one-on-one individual coaching clients working on some workshops, virtual. I have a virtual workshop that I'm going to be
Hmm.
launching later this year. And I have a free webinar to help people kind of get started thinking
Right.
that I offer every couple of months. So it's going well. I have done a couple presentations at conferences, trying to get tapped into the employer market because I
Hmm.
think employers
Hmm.
need to get their employees thinking about this and thinking
Hmm.
more broadly about retirement than just the money side of things.
Right. Some of the challenges of life that you can prepare for is thinking
Hmm.
about purpose and identity, and
Yeah.
instead of just jumping over.
Yeah. And interestingly, retirement ranks in the top 10 of most stressful life changes above things like the death of a close friend and having a child, right? Like all
Hmm.
the things that you think
Hmm.
about that would cause you stress. Interestingly, for a lot of people, retirement is a really difficult one. So just the more you can do to prepare for that transition, the better.
I think it was neuroscientist Maya Shankar that said any change comes with loss of identity because
Yeah.
even if it changes who you are, and there's
Hmm.
grief for who you were as
Hmm.
well as the ability. So I love that you're coaching people into what's next. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming on to talk about how to share life's challenges. So good to see you.
My pleasure. It was great to see you, and thanks for having me, Wynne.
Thank you for listening. Our music was written for us by the incredible duo of Jack Campora and Rob Koenig. For show notes and more great inspiration, see avitiva.com, abitiva.com.